I'm not on Twitter because I consider Twitter to be
Why not? Why not?
Because I consider it to be the sweaty armpit of social media, frankly.
Oh, for God's sake,
it's just not very nice. And if you want to be, I'll buy the idea that Mr. Musk says that he wants it to be like a town square, because a town square actually is accountable. If somebody says something in a town square, I can see them. I know who they are, and I'm going to see them in the street tomorrow because it's a town square. And that's why a town square debate is largely a more moderate debate than what you see on social media and Twitter. So if he's going to get serious about that, I agree. You shouldn't be able to have pseudonyms. You should have to say who you are. You should be. It should be a real person saying something. And if you're then accountable, well, maybe it'll work. But I don't think it will.
That's a fair point. Real name, real photo, Paul.
Yeah, look, I'm definitely a fan of that sort of approach. I'm not sure whether that's the direction that that Twitter will take. And in fact, there's suggestion that even the Twitter verified program that's been in place is now going to cost verified users $20 a month.
All right, Paul, we've got to go, mate. But thanks for that. Bring back MySpace. That's my thoughts. Jenny, Phil, thanks. Back tomorrow.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Our Haere Ake nei, Air New Zealand says more planes are en route and that should mean lower fares. Amid claims of price gouging, boss Greg Foran fronts up. Workers with disabilities are getting paid as little as $1.55 an hour. Why? A 14-year-old's facing 81 charges after a wave of brazen attacks and aggravated robberies in Christchurch. A fiasco is how some describe Rotorua's emergency housing. And are you about to catch a bus in Auckland? Well, stand by, because AT plans to slash the city's timetable. They're live with the details. Don't forget, you can watch us live, Sky Channel 83, Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5. Ahi Marie, good afternoon. I'm Evie Ashton. The Mayor of Auckland says an alternative proposal to the Three Waters reforms will put an end to what he calls a divisive plan. The Auckland, Christchurch and Waimakariri mayors met in Auckland today to discuss what they say is a better alternative to the government's proposed scheme. Wayne Brown says the proposal echoes what he discussed with Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and Local Government Minister Nanaia Mahuta over the last 2 weeks.
I raised the point, which I just said before, is yet to explain to me how our best CCO water care would be improved with 40 new northern ones and vice versa, and that wasn't really answered.
Wayne Brown says he wants a plan that maintains local ownership of water assets. The widow of the final victim in 2019's mosque terror attack says things haven't improved for New Zealand Muslims. A gathering on countering terrorism and violent extremism, He Whenua Tauri Kura Hui, got underway in Auckland today. Hamima Amhat, the wife of Zechariah Tuyan, the 51st victim of the terrorist attack, is at the hui and says little has changed.
We recently have just witnessed people with white supremacy ideologies wanting to get onto the school board. We have our own sisters, their hijab being pulled away. Myself personally, I had been walking just recently along the road and I was told to go back to my own country.
Hamima Amhat says anti-Asian rhetoric has also risen as a result of COVID-19. Air New Zealand's chief executive says the airline's trying to increase capacity and believes that will bring prices down. The national carrier has been criticised for higher than normal ticket prices. There are no flights from Auckland to Wellington this week for less than $310. Air New Zealand CEO Greg Foran says it's working to bring back planes from storage and get new ones.
We're still doing everything that we can to bring capacity back as quickly as we can, and also ensuring that our opening price points are there and available for customers.
You can hear more from Greg Foran on Checkpoint shortly. The Prime Minister admits she's more freedom to take action against Iran now that 2 New Zealanders who were stuck there have been freed. But she rejects the situation prevented her from taking a strong stance on Iran. A Kiwi couple who'd had their movements restricted by Iranian authorities for months were assisted out of the country by the government last week. Jacinda Ardern says New Zealand is now in an improved position to ramp up its response.
I will push back on any suggestion that we did not condemn Iran. We did. We took a very clear view on what was happening to the status of women and girls. We took a very clear stand on what happened to Mahsa Amini. But this now allows us to take further action.
New Zealand today announced it's suspending its human rights dialogue with Iran. A former Rotorua councillor says a rise in emergency housing in the city has created a monster. More than 20 people have spoken at a hearing organised by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development and the Council on the impact of social housing. Meripeka Raukawa Tate has advocated for changes to the scheme. She told the meeting that families and businesses are too frightened to speak up.
I think people are scared, particularly those that live near and around the motels. They see the police cars there all the time. They see and hear the abusive behaviour that's going on. And yes, they're scared and they're frightened. It is a recipe for disaster.
Meripeka Raukawa Tate says motels aren't designed to accommodate families long term. And a woman has been charged after a baby was found dead in a hospital rubbish bin. The baby was found at Middlemore Hospital on August 4th last year. Police say the 28-year-old has appeared in the Manukau District Court on a charge of concealing the body of a child. In sport, revenge is on the mind of the Black Ferns as they prepare for this weekend's Rugby World Cup semi-final against France. The Black Ferns were beaten twice by France on last season's end-of-year tour. Coach Wayne Smith wasn't involved with the team then, but says they're desperate to get one back over a French side who will provide the Black Ferns with their toughest challenge of the Cup so far.
There's pride at stake, I think. We'll have a good week preparing for this, but what I've seen from them, they're extremely efficient, do things well, got some good players, so it's going to be a battle.
England play Canada in the other semi-final. Red Bull's double world champion Max Verstappen has won the Mexico City Grand Prix to set a Formula One record of 14 victories in a single season. The Dutch 25-year-old led from pole position to take the checkered flag ahead of Lewis Hamilton from Mercedes. Wellington Phoenix midfielder Grace Wisniewski has been named in the Football Ferns for the first time. The New Zealand under-20 representative is the only uncapped player named in the 24-strong squad against South Korea in Christchurch next month. And Australian cyclist Marcus Cooley has won the 166-kilometre second stage of the Tour of Southland from Invercargill to Lumsden. Cooley won a 4-rider sprint up the main street of Lumsden to take the stage. Tour leader Boris Clark of Waikato has a 9-second lead. That's the news.
A boost for bus drivers.
The $61 million announcement will go some way to improving the attraction of new drivers to the job.
The Black Ferns in fine form.
They were sensational. Entertaining, these are just energetic, 100% footy players.
And a surprise win in the Bird of the Year.
The winner of Bird of the Year 2022 is the Rock Wren.
All this and more on Morning Report weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. We're on air on rnz.co.nz and on your mobile. You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. For Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, cloudy periods, a few afternoon showers, thunderstorms possible in Northland today. Bay of Plenty and Gisborne. Periods of rain with heavy falls in eastern Bay of Plenty and the ranges of Gisborne. Fine tomorrow, apart from isolated afternoon showers. From Waikato to Manawatu, including the Central High Country, also Hawke's Bay and the Rotorua district. Scattered showers, some heavy and possibly thundery, clearing this evening. Fine tomorrow, but areas of morning fog. For the remainder of Wairarapa and from Horowhenua to Wellington, isolated showers, clearing this afternoon or evening. Fine tomorrow. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland, scattered showers, some heavy with thunderstorms about Canterbury and North Otago, clearing this evening. Fine tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, showers, some heavy with thunderstorms possible in Westland and Bulla, turning to rain in Fiordland tomorrow evening. And the forecast for Te Kohu, the Chatham Islands, rain. The time is 7 minutes past 5. I'll have news headlines and traffic for you at 5:20.
Nā mihi, Evie. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Air New Zealand says more planes are on the way and with them the hope of cheaper airfares. The national carrier is facing heavy criticism over the cost of its flights, with some passengers saying they're paying 2 and 3 times pre-pandemic prices. The airline is blaming a combination of rising fuel prices, inflation and high demand, advising passengers to book as early as possible to get a deal. But even looking months ahead, Checkpoint couldn't find the cheapies it said were on offer. As for increasing capacity, Air New Zealand CEO Greg Foran is expecting half a dozen more planes to arrive over the next 7 months.
I really feel for people with prices at the moment. You know, there are a few things that are driving this. You know, one is that we are seeing some very strong demand out there, and we've seen that actually ever since the borders reopened and we got on the far side of COVID. And the second thing is that, you know, the low price fares, because of that, are selling out pretty quickly. And then finally, you know, we're not immune to any of the cost increases that other people are seeing.
So why don't you offer more spots on planes? How many planes have you still got that are parked up?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and we are working very quickly to get all the planes back. You know, we had the 777s parked in the desert. We've got 4 of those up and running already. We've got another 3 to come, and they're coming pretty quickly. We've got another, you know, one before the end of this year. How quickly,
Greg? The 3 that are on...
Yeah, one in December, Lisa, and the next ones are coming in February and May.
That doesn't seem that fast.
Well, actually, you've got to combine a number of things when you do it. It's not just getting the planes, Lisa. It's also making sure that you've got the pilots to fly them, you've got the crew, and you've got the engineers to maintain them. And, you know, we've brought back 2,200 staff since the beginning of the year. They need to be trained and, you know, recalibrated and qualified. So that's happening at world record pace. And as well as that, we've got 3 more domestic jets that will be joining our fleet. The first one actually is probably going to land into Auckland tomorrow and be in service in a week or so's time, and the other one before Christmas.
So will that bring cheaper fares, Greg, those 2 planes arriving?
It will, because what happens, Lisa, is that, you know, as you start to get capacity in there, then you start to deal with this very strong demand we're seeing. And as well as that, competitors going, you know, flat out adding capacity back as well. So I think in time what we'll see prices moderating.
Yeah, but how much time? Because people are hurting now, right?
Yeah, and, you know, some of that is a little bit hard to tell exactly, but, you know, we're working as quickly as we can to get capacity back to what we know is acceptable. And, you know, I was overseas last week. I flew back actually on Saturday. We only had 1 spare seat on the 777 I was on. And so, you know, I'm very cognizant of this and getting everything up and running as quickly as we can.
I just want to talk to you about your so-called cheaper airfares, right? Air New Zealand issued us with a statement when obviously people were raising concerns about fare prices, and it was suggested you could get $59 one-way fares domestic, $378 for Honolulu. We looked out until October of next year. We couldn't find these cheap fares. So what percentage of cheap fares are you offering?
Look, off the top of my head, Lisa, I wouldn't know that exact percentage, but, you know, I can tell you, being completely transparent, that, you know, domestic fares generally are up about 20%. That's on average. And international fares at the moment are up about 50% on where they were pre-COVID. We're still doing everything that we can to bring capacity back as quickly as we can, and also ensuring that our opening price points are there and available for customers. But, you know,
so can I just talk to you about that, the opening price point, as you call it? So looking to the Wellington flight schedule for this week from Auckland to Wellington, I can't see anything for less than $349 one way. So you're talking more than, you know, close to $700 for a return ticket to Wellington. Does that seem right and fair for the national carrier that is the cheapest ticket you can get this week?
Well, Lisa, when you're booking reasonably late, and this week is pretty late, that's what tends to happen when you have very strong demand for people to travel. Now, our domestic business currently is running at about 97% of what it was pre-COVID. So, you know, my advice to customers is book earlier, please. and, we're getting as much capacity back as quickly as we can. This is not a situation which just Air New Zealand is finding itself in. Most airlines are. Most airlines are probably running at about 75-80% of pre-COVID capacity.
I want to talk about your New York flight, non-stop, allegedly. It hasn't really gone to plan. How would you describe it so far?
I think it's an exceptional route that we're running to New York, Lisa. First of all, there is really strong demand on that flight. Secondly, I'm thrilled that Air New Zealand is getting out there and having a go at something. What a terrific time to show a bit of ambition and get out there and fly this particular route.
And that's Air New Zealand CEO Greg Foran. Really interested in your thoughts on this one. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email us checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. What do you think of the air ticket prices at the moment and how they compare to pre-COVID? More planes on the way. CEO of Air New Zealand there saying he's hoping that may bring prices down. It is 13 minutes after 5. Kia mau tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Auckland Transport has announced cancelled bus journeys will now not exist at all. It says from Sunday, services that are being regularly cancelled because of the bus driver shortage will be suspended completely. AT says they are not taking away anything that's running, just temporarily removing cancelled services from the timetable so they won't show up and then appear as cancelled. AT says by making these changes, customers will have more confidence and certainty about their trips. Wow, let us know what you think about that. Text us 2101 or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. We'll speak to AT after 6 tonight. Let us know in particular if a particular route that you use is cancelled all the time. We'd love to know which ones. 2101 on text. Christchurch police are confident they've arrested a group of youths responsible for recent assaults and vehicle thefts across the city. A 14-year-old has appeared in youth court on 81 charges, including assaults with intent to injure, aggravated robbery and theft. 3 others are being dealt with by Youth Aid. Videos of attacks have surfaced over the past few days, and a spike in youth crime in central Christchurch, mostly around the central bus terminal, has businesses on alert. Joining us now is Chair of the Central City Business Association, Annabelle Turley. Kia ora, Annabelle.
Hello.
Have you seen some of these videos that have been circulating, and what do you make of what's been going on?
I actually haven't seen the videos, to be honest, but I do think it's really unfortunate what's happening. Unfortunately, the central city is not isolated in the area that this sort of thing is happening. It does seem to be happening across the city, across the country. And it's just really, really disappointing that there's not the police resources to deal with this.
What has been going on in Christchurch specifically? What kind of things are you seeing?
Well, actually, we've seen since we've got our safety team, we've actually seen a significant decrease.
Sorry, could you say that again, Annabelle? Your phone just dropped out. You were saying?
Well, since we've had our safety team on board helping, we've actually seen a drop in incidents reported by the businesses around antisocial behaviour and crime.
So what is the safety team and what do they do and who pays for them?
So the Business Association is currently paying for the safety team. Initially we had a joint trial with the City Council where we both paid for half, and then after the trial ended we got overwhelming feedback from our members about having the trained security guards who sort of help show people around and help with antisocial behaviour and anti-crime like theft.
So how much is that costing your organisation?
It's not cheap. I think it's around about 50,000 every 3 months.
So do you think you're paying for a job that the police should be doing?
Absolutely, without a doubt. We were promised when another member of the executive and I met with the Prime Minister, once MIQ ended, we would see beat police on our streets.
So who should be picking up the tab when you're talking tens of thousands of dollars?
Well, they're essentially doing the job of the police. So really, like as taxpayers, we pay tax to have police keeping us safe.
Really appreciate your time this evening. That's the Central City Business Association Chair, Annabelle Turley there. Let us know your thoughts on that one, especially if you're living in Christchurch. Text us on 2101. Residents and business owners have called the emergency housing system in Rotorua a fiasco. Today, locals and businesses told the Housing Ministry how the program affects their lives and livelihoods. The Ministry wants to keep 13 motels in the city operating as emergency housing for the next 5 years. Our reporter Haisa Almeida and camera operator Marika Habazi spoke to some of the submitters.
Once known as the jewel in the tourism crown, Rotorua residents say their town has seen better days. Motels all down Fenton Street are packed with those waiting for a forever home. The Ministry of Housing and Urban Development wants to keep 13 of these motels operating for emergency housing for the next 5 years. Former Rotorua councillor Merepeka Raukawa Tate came to the hearing with her sister, representing the Apollo Hotel. She says the emergency housing system in Rotorua has created a monster.
You've heard from the citizens of Rotorua, and their concerns are absolutely correct. They're fearful of people who really didn't want to be in that position themselves.
Merepeka Raukara Tate says motels are not designed to house families for long periods.
When people live in close quarters, as in a motel, then there's always high stress and high tension. And many of those families already have health needs. And so those just escalate. And that escalation plays out on the streets in the behaviour that we see. And that's unfair for the citizens of Rotorua.
The lobby group Restore Rotorua has about 200 members, and its chairperson Trevor Newbrook says the character of the town has changed.
There's a lot of gangs in there, there's a lot of drug dealing, there's a lot of alcohol abuse, there's a lot of rubbish. The street's been cleaned up for this hearing, but Fenton Street's generally been pretty messy over the last couple of years.
Mr. Newbrook says emergency housing clusters have made the city unsafe.
People are worried about their safety. If you go back 3 years, I wouldn't have thought twice about walking home. I live a couple of streets up the road here. I would have quite happily walked home from town at night on my own. I wouldn't have thought anything about it. I wouldn't even consider going onto Fenton Street at night on my own now. So it's definitely an issue.
With the hearing, residents and business owners have had their first chance to speak their mind on the increase of emergency housing in Rotorua. They say they do not agree on giving resource consent to 13 motels that would secure emergency housing contracts for the next 5 years.
What happened was...
Kane Alexander has been living in emergency housing Rotorua for more than a year.
I'm standing up for victims because I run a victim support group and I'm part of human rights. I've realised that there's not enough people sticking up for victims, and most of the people in these places don't have the intelligence or anything like that, any kind of support network or group to show them in the right direction, so they have got nowhere to run to.
The hearing is expected to continue tomorrow.
It is almost 21 after 5 and you're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. Lots to get in touch with us about. Homai o Whakaaro, we would love your feedback. What do you think about AT cutting the bus timetable in Auckland? We'll have more details on that after 6. And also Air New Zealand fares. Are they fair? Are they reasonable? Let us know your thoughts. Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Evie is standing very by with the headlines. Anea Evie, mena pita kōrero.
Kia ora, Lisa. Air New Zealand says the best way to get the most affordable flights is to book early. The airline is being accused of hiking fares. But CEO Greg Foran has told Checkpoint they're getting more planes, which will increase capacity and bring down prices. He says higher fares are due to rising fuel prices, inflation and demand. Auckland's mayor claims a new plan for the Three Waters reforms maintains key parts of the government's proposal while keeping ownership in the hands of councils. The Auckland, Christchurch and Waimakariri mayors have met in Auckland today to discuss what they say is a better alternative to the government's ideas. Wayne Brown says it echoes what he's discussed with Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and Local Government Minister Nanaia Mahuta over the past 2 weeks. The widow of the final victim in 2019's mosque terrorist attack has told a meeting that the plight of New Zealand Muslims hasn't improved. A hui on counter-terrorism and violent extremism is underway in Auckland. And Australian research shows regional powers have poured a record amount of money into the Pacific Islands during the pandemic, but China's financial contributions have plunged. An annual study by the Lowry Institute shows financial assistance increased by more than a third in 2020 compared with the previous year. Australia is by far the biggest provider. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, it looks like everything is moving usually. I'll have more news headlines and any traffic news for you at about 5:40.
Kia ora, e ho. The All Blacks will kick on for the next chapter of their Northern Tour, needing a new captain and without some midfielders who have been sent to the B team. Following Saturday's narrow win over Japan, the team has been hit by injuries and potential suspensions and some unforced changes. We're joined now by sports reporter Felicity Reid. OK, so the All Blacks will be missing some leaders for Sunday's game against Wales. Facial injury for one, yes.
That's right. Captain Sam Cane, double cheek fracture picked up late in that game against Japan. He played on, but he is on the plane home to New Zealand having surgery, and it's likely that he's going to get a steel plate put into that cheek as well to help with the recovery process. So yes, you're right, that does mean a new captain coming along, and Coach Ian Foster does know who this is going to be, but he hasn't announced it yet. He was talking about the flights between Cardiff and Japan. All the players leaving Japan sort of needed to be split up onto multiple flights. He hadn't had a chance to speak to the player who he's nominated for this role, wanted to do so before he publicly announced his next All Blacks captain. Likely to be Adi Savia, who is amongst those players on tour, but they are losing some other leaders as well. Brodie Retallick is the one facing that potential ban. He picked up a red card for a clean-out during a ruck. He's been cited by the judiciary. He'll face them tomorrow. The All Blacks are saying that they're going to fight that, and he faces a potential 2-game ban, but there's only 3 games on this Northern Tour, so that could end his tour for him if he doesn't get his name cleared, I guess, at the judiciary for that. And Dane Coles is the other one with an injury. Another experienced guy picked up a calf injury in warm-up. Apparently it was quite innocuous, didn't do anything different, been training hard all week. But for a guy who's known to have calf injuries and Achilles injuries, just another blow for him.
Yeah, OK. And the to and fro between the All Blacks and the All Blacks 15 continues. What's going on there?
Yeah, there has been a little bit of criticism about the purpose of what this actual All Blacks 15 team is. It's been a bit of a wider squad for the All Blacks, both in the same hemisphere, an opportunity to move players between both squads as we've had injuries, bereavement leave, family reasons, players have left the tour. Roger Tuivasa-Sheck is the latest one to make the move between the two. He started in his first All Blacks game and his third game for New Zealand since his change from rugby league. He's now been made the move down to that team, the All Blacks 15, which will play Island A on Friday. But he's not the only one. Braden Enner, his midfield partner, also has been moved along to that other squad, which is coached by Blues coach Leon McDonald. And staying with the All Blacks as Mark Talia, who was one of those players that did get moved up from the All Blacks 15. But Patrick Tuipulotu and Damien McKenzie, who were called up as cover earlier in the season, have made the move back to that.
So it's a bit of a revolving door.
Absolutely. I think they've been lucky to have all of these players around should they need them.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Felicity. Felicity Reid there. Let's get to some of your feedback now, coming thick and fast on the subject of Air New Zealand. Dale says, I'm happy with the airfares Air New Zealand is offering. They are operating as a prudent business at a time when their capacity is not able to meet demand. And Greg Foran said, book ahead. Yes, he did. But sometimes this listener says you can't, especially if there is a seriously ill family member or a sudden death. These fares in New Zealand are outrageous. And someone else says, in the next 3 months, the cheapest economy airfare from Auckland to Vietnam is $4,300. Is that a return ticket? Let us know. It used to be $1,500. They're saying almost 200% higher. Do keep your feedback coming. 2101 on text, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. $1.55 an hour is what one worker with a disability is being paid, while the government drags its feet on phasing out a minimum wage exemption. 3 years ago, the government announced it would scrap the exemptions and replace them with a wage subsidy. Employers can apply for the exemption if they are hiring a worker with a disability and believe it's appropriate to pay less than the minimum wage. MB says there are 169 workers with the exemption. Reporter Louise Tanuth and camera operator Nick Monroe have the story.
For 63 years, Abilities Incorporated has been operating as a not-for-profit business on Auckland's North Shore. They recycle everything from cardboard to tons of e-waste and also package products. Of the 149 people who work here, 119 are disabled and have a minimum wage exemption. If MB's figures are correct, this represents 2/3 of the entire nation's exempt workforce. Under the Minimum Wage Act, businesses can apply for an exemption to pay an employee with a disability less than the minimum wage, on the basis they're less productive.
Oh, am I loading the truck?
No, you're loading the trolley.
The trolley.
Yeah, okay. Let's see you load it. Is this going to John, the long one?
That's going to John.
Managing Director Peter Fra has been running the business for 18 years.
And every day I go home, I feel like I have contributed to the lives of 119 people who otherwise would have nowhere to work.
3 years ago, the government announced they would scrap the exemption and replace it with a wage subsidy. But Peter says that leaves them with huge uncertainty for the future.
The devil's in the detail. Exactly how is this going to be implemented? And one of our problems we've got at the moment is a total lack of communication or involvement. How is that money going to be guaranteed? How can I sign an employment agreement which is for the term of that person's stay at Abilities when I only get a 1 or 2 year contract? How can I fund it? So there's just too many questions.
He says if the subsidy is to take place, they'll need guaranteed financial support to retain their workers.
The good thing about these reforms, as against the previous ones, is there is a recognition that work is essential. It is providing an essential part for these people's lives. So the statement that we've heard is no one should be worse off. But that's easy to say. It's difficult to actually put that into practice.
Hello. You ready for home?
Yeah.
Have you got your boots on?
Yep.
That's good.
Lee Watts has been working at Abilities Group for 26 years.
This is his life. I know when I drop him off here and I go off to work, he's safe. As a whole family, it is the best place ever.
His mum Jane is worried a wage subsidy will threaten his job.
They would be told, I'm sorry, there's no work for you today. And they might work 2 days in a fortnight and then they'd have to go to Wins and ask for more money.
Lee is paid just $1.55 an hour. Along with his disability benefit, he takes home $442 a week. If he was paid minimum wage, he would lose his benefit, but could be paid twice as much.
Does he know much about what he gets paid?
He just knows he gets his pay slip every week and he knows that he can go to JB Hi-Fi.
There's no doubt other workers like being here.
Lucky to have a job. I like helping, yes. I started when I'm 25. I am 61 years old.
Some team members are aware of plans to scrap their exemptions.
I'm more worried about losing our benefit. That is the only thing that's worrying me, you know.
If you were assured you wouldn't lose your benefit, would you like to be paid at least the minimum wage?
Yes, I wouldn't mind.
Yep. She's the queen. She tells me about my mother. Yes, I know. And your mother's coming at 2 o'clock today. I'll see your mum. I haven't seen her.
But for other businesses, an exemption is not an option.
What does it say about how they value our disabled community when you have MWE in place? It's completely contradictory. The government is supposed to be supporting quality life for disabled people, and they're not doing that.
4 years ago, Jennifer Dalbell started a candle-making business, Downlights, to employ young adults with Down syndrome and intellectual disabilities. They have 4 part-time staff and pay the living wage. She says other businesses are choosing profitability over quality of life for their employees.
If you have a business in place that can't operate without employing people and paying them the minimum wage exemption, maybe you should not be operating at all.
She says the assumption disabled workers are less productive is simply not the case. Downlights produces 1,000 candles a week to around 150 businesses.
Our team are the most amazing workers. They're on time. When they're here at work, they don't have their mobile phones turned on. They're not checking their text messages or Instagram feed every 2 seconds. They're loyal. They're a really valuable employee.
Grace Stratton from All Is For All has been disabled her whole life and echoes this concern.
I think we really need to challenge this idea that it's somehow acceptable to pay someone considerably less because they are perceived to be a lot below a certain level of productivity. I don't think a minimum wage is tied to productivity. I think it is about human rights.
She acknowledges the solution is complicated, but says something needs to change.
We will do more harm if we just take the waiver away. That being said, I do believe in and subscribe to having a really robust conversation about alternatives to the waiver, because I don't think we can leave it in place.
He's coming to rescue you. You'll be right. I'll get rid of these for you.
For Peter Fra, it's a nervous wait to find out what that means for them.
And until something is promoted that is better than this and will give people with an intellectual disability more opportunities for employment, I can't see a positive change taking place. So, in a lot of ways, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
In a statement, a spokesperson for the Minister of Social Development and Employment, Carmel Sepuloni, says they've engaged with the disability sector and businesses, and work is underway to develop proposals for a wage subsidy to replace the exemption.
And if you were listening on radio, do check out the video version of that story from Louise Tanuth and Nick Munro. We'll put it on our webpage. Also interested in your thoughts on that. Is the purpose of a minimum wage so that everybody is paid a minimum, or do you think there's a fair reason for the exemption? Should it be replaced with a subsidy, which is what Labor promised in its election manifesto in 2020? 2101 on text or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. It is 26 minutes to 6. Kia amo tunu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National, and it is time for the business news, which means Nona Peltier is in the studio. Ko taku hoa e nai nei ko Nona Peltier. Nona, what are we talking about first off? Banking sector, well placed to cope with major economic downturn. Who says?
The Reserve Bank. They have they do a stress test annually to see how their banking sector could cope in a downturn. This time they're looking at what would happen if we had a situation of stagflation. That's the terrible situation where you have both high inflation and falling economic growth, so basically a recession. So how would you cope in that with, sky high interest rates and unemployment at what were the numbers they were using? Yeah. So you'd have something like a mortgage rate peaking at 8.4%. You'd have an OCR at 5.5. The equity markets would have dropped by 38%. Unemployment would be 9.3%. And the house prices would have fallen by 47%. So how would banks cope? Apparently quite well. So there you go. Don't worry.
How would the people cope?
Well, that's another question. I don't think that is covered in the stress test.
Because basically a few of them are just choking on their cup of tea with that scenario that you've just presented.
This is the worst case scenario, and we're not there. I want to reassure people that we are still in a period of economic growth, and no, we don't have stagflation. So good luck for us, right?
And they gave no predictions on how likelihood that scenario is?
Look, stagflation is unlikely in almost any scenario. It's one of the worst possible cases, which is one of the reasons why the Reserve Bank is acting quite aggressively to get inflation under control. That's the last thing you want is inflation at whatever I said that was, some awful number.
Yeah,
what was it? I don't even think about it. No, let's not think about that.
Okay. Green Party proposal to introduce a windfall tax on big corporate profits, and apparently that carries some risks. A couple of things here. In the briefest way possible, explain to people what a windfall tax is and what are the risks.
Well, so a windfall tax is basically would be applied to about 20 of the top big companies in certain sectors like banking, petroleum, energy, supermarkets, and banking that have made quite good profits through the pandemic, but also received, for example, government subsidies to help them through. So the idea is that when through the bad times they were helped out, now they want something back. And what would that be? Well, it's not been determined what a windfall tax would end up being, but it's not the first time we've had one. We had one during World War I, World War II. There were windfall taxes put into place to help regenerate the economies. But look, Business New Zealand says these things are really hard to administer, and they don't like it at all. And they don't think it would gather much revenue. They're saying that if you look back in history, it wasn't the case. We talked to the Chartered Accountants, New Zealand and Australia, their tax leader. He says, these kinds of things are always concerning. If they're piecemeal, he said, when we look at the tax system, we should be looking at it in a whole way, not just here and there. We've seen where that creates unintended consequences. And the last thing you want are businesses looking to avoid paying tax. That's really the bottom line. So it's only a proposal at this stage. It was brought forward by the Green Party. They're just saying it's a discussion document, but the accountants say anytime you just bring up the subject, that causes uncertainty in the business community. That's never good when it comes to businesses planning. They don't like uncertainty, and which means that investment decisions get put on hold.
And what numbers do you bring for us, Nona?
Good ones. I've got some good, strong numbers for you. Yeah. The NZX Top 50, it ended up 1.9% today. That's a 209-point gain to 11,338. The Kiwi trading at 58.2 US cents. So it's ended up the month on top of its game. So there you go. 90.6 Australian and 50.1 British pence.
Thank you, Nona. Ka kite, Nona Peltier there with Business News. 3 mayors have proposed their own changes to the contentious Three Waters scheme. The mayors of Auckland, Christchurch and Waimakarere say their plan would end the divisive nationwide argument on the policy. The new proposal would maintain the new water regulator but keep local ownership, control and accountability. Auckland's Mayor Wayne Brown says he's told Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and Local Government Minister Nanaia Mahuta about the plan.
I raised the point, which I just said before, is yet to explain to me how our best CCO water care would be improved with 40 new northern ones and vice versa, and that wasn't really answered.
Waimakarere Mayor Dan Gordon says the proposal isn't necessarily striking out against co-governance.
I'm not ruling that in or out. Actually, that's a conversation that we want to have with mana whenua, and that's at the level. My district, we have a really good relationship with mana whenua, and we have lots of examples of co-governance. I'm not afraid of co-governance being there. That's a conversation I want to have at a local level with my iwi.
And Christchurch Mayor Phil Major says collaborating with central government on this proposal will be important.
We want to work with them to go forward because as we were talking before, we don't want to see it all flip-flop and rescinded and stuff like that. We're better off to work with government that we've got for a solution that goes on forever.
And the 3 mayors have said the next step in their proposal will be building support from other councils and mayors. 20 to 6 here, so you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaarodi, keep your feedback coming 2101 on text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ and the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time for the headlines. Here's Evie, ko Evie anō tēnei.
The Prime Minister says she doesn't want to see the fundamental principles of the Three Waters reforms undermined. The mayors of Auckland, Christchurch and Waimakarere are promoting an alternative plan which they say maintains the government's key goals while keeping ownership under councils. Jacinda Ardern says the bottom line will be ensuring costs don't increase for ratepayers. A former Rotorua councillor has told a meeting on the city's emergency housing that many people are too afraid to speak up about the problems it's causing. More than 20 people have spoken at the hearing organised by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development and the council. Merepika Raukawa Tate says motels aren't designed to accommodate families in the long term. A report has found Palmerston North Hospital's overstretched and under-resourced emergency department contributed to the death of a patient 4 years ago. The woman needed surgery to her nose after falling over, but it was later found she'd suffered a head injury. The Deputy Health and Disability Commissioner has ruled she received inadequate care. And an airline service between Nelson and Blenheim will be extended after strong demand for flights. Origin Air will now fly between the two centres for 7 weeks while repairs are made to flood-damaged State Highway 6. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, it looks pretty usual across all of our main centres, a little bit off the beaten track. State Highway 2 west of Opotiki is still closed tonight between Waiotahi Valley Back Road and Pairata Ridge Road because of a large slip. Geotech engineers are on site tomorrow to assess the risk before the clean-up can get underway. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Ngā mihi, Evie. Shocked family members in South Korea have been visiting hospitals and trying to find loved ones after at least 153 people were crushed to death in Seoul. As many as 100,000 people were celebrating Halloween when a huge crowd surged into an alleyway, causing the crush. Those who've lost loved ones are desperate for answers about how the tragedy happened. Our correspondent Chris Gilbert joins us now from nearby Tokyo. Kia ora, Chris. What's the latest?
Well, the latest is that people are looking into how this happened, but still many people are missing. Many people are in critical care, and families still have the very unpleasant task of going through and identifying bodies. We do know somewhat the details and the facts on the ground of what exactly did happen. Itaewon is a nightlife, a party district in Seoul. This particular Halloween party is an institution. It's very, very popular every year, but there was so much pent-up demand after 3 years of no parties, tight COVID restrictions. A lot of people wanted to get out and be together again, and estimates are about 100,000 people turned up to this area, which, as we know, has very narrow streets and some hills as well. And in a crowd that size, people simply can't communicate. If you're in the middle of the street and there are people coming in from the top and coming in from the bottom, they might not know that there are people in the middle who can't get out. I've actually been in a situation like this in Tokyo once before, a feeling of losing control, the crowd taking over, being pushed around. You can see panic start to set in. And in this case, as reports have said, people became unruly and agitated. And it came to a head on a very steep slope where people began falling over each other and becoming crushed under each other. There are reports that people are saying there might have been a celebrity nearby that people were surging in to have a look at, or maybe even there's been rumors of drugs were being distributed in the area, or that people at the top of the hill were pushing as a joke. But whatever happened, it definitely started a domino effect, and it ended up in the tragedy we're talking about now.
Chris, I know one Australian witness has described it as a slow crush, and he said numbers grew there over a period of time, and as did the unrest. So given that and some of the reports, why weren't there enough police monitoring the situation? Why didn't authorities step in?
Well, that is the $64,000 question. Why wasn't more done? I mean, to really control a crowd that size, you have to control it from the outset, before they turn up, before the people are there. And maybe the authorities were not expecting it to be so popular based on previous numbers. Maybe it took everybody by surprise. That's what the investigation is looking at now. There are things that can be done. For example, in Shibuya in Tokyo a few years ago, there was a Halloween party where some fires were lit and a truck was turned over, and so they implemented measures from then on to have a stronger police presence. Anytime you go to really big festivals in this part of the world, they try and move them to the main boulevards, the wide areas. There's a lot of police and patrols on hand and around, blowing whistles and waving batons, telling people to keep moving, because if you don't keep moving in a crowd that size, the people behind you don't know what's going on and everybody gets stuck. So it's certainly something for not just South Korea, but for countries all over this part of the world and, all over Asia to look at, where there are lots of narrow streets and high population numbers that are going to big festivals, to really look at and think, well, okay, as we lift our COVID-19 restrictions later than the rest of the world, what are the dangers for people? What demand is there for people to go to these festivals, and what can we do about it going forward?
Chris, what are authorities saying about the death toll? Because as we understand the reports, there are some very critically ill people as well.
That's right. Yeah, there's about 154 at last count dead, a couple up from yesterday, and they're saying that could rise by 30 or so because of those in critical care right now. There's also a lot missing. More than 20 foreigners or expats, visitors to South Korea amongst the dead, including 2 Americans, an Australian, a couple from Japan and other parts of the world. And tragically, a lot of women. Some numbers I saw were that there were almost 100 women dead, just over 50 men. And scores of injured and still unaccounted for. And 90% of the bodies have been identified now. But as horrible as all this is in the death toll, we also have to consider the other casualties of this, which is the trauma of everybody who was there. Thousands and thousands of people who witnessed this were part of this. The scenes of dozens of people doing CPR on lifeless bodies in the street. And, of course, officials are saying, warning, please do not watch the videos that are going around, because the collective trauma of this incident is going to be a whole nother wave of tragedy on top of it, as if it hasn't been tragedy enough already.
Thank you for the update, Chris. That's Chris Gilbert, our correspondent there, joining us from Tokyo. It is 12 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Health advocates hope the most meaningful aspects of alcohol law reform are still to come. The government has announced a law change to remove the ability to appeal local alcohol policies, but a review on steps like sports sponsorship, age change and unit pricing won't be revealed until next year. Here's our political reporter, Giles Dexter.
The government is amending the Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act, removing the ability for supermarkets and liquor chains to appeal local alcohol policies. It's also undertaking a broader review of the licensing system, pricing and marketing, which could include removing alcohol sponsorship from sport. Justice Minister Kiri Allen says those next steps are challenging and complex and will take some time.
I'm very comfortable with the fact that I'm working actively on a plan and I'll be announcing that in March.
But this has been part of the conversation for a long time. Successive governments have looked at it and done nothing. Removing alcohol sponsorship from sport was one of the key recommendations in a Law Commission report in 2010. Its co-author, former Prime Minister Sir Geoffrey Palmer, has often expressed frustration over the slow movement of alcohol reform, a sentiment shared by Green MP Chloe Swarbrick.
We can't kick this can any further down the road. As I've said, we've had report after report after report that has said to the government to do exactly the same thing.
Sports and Recreation Minister Grant Robertson has previously voiced his concerns a sponsorship ban could remove critical funding for grassroots sport. Public Health Agency Hāpai Te Hauora CEO Salah Hart believes the only reason grassroots teams apply for alcohol funding is because they often don't have other options.
If we had an alternative solution that was based from a government-aided perspective, or some other agency that is health-focused or sport-focused, not harmful commodity-focused, I'm pretty sure 9 times out of 10 those sporting codes would come across. It's just that they don't have an avenue to explore.
Nationals Justice spokesperson Paul Goldsmith says it's appropriate the government takes the time to get the next steps right.
We just have to think that through carefully. You can't ban everything, but from a public health point of view, alcohol causes a lot of damage, but also, you could extend that logic to a whole lot of other areas.
Despite yesterday's announcement, Ms Swarbrick won't withdraw her members' bill calling for an end to alcohol sponsorship. And while Hāpai Te Hauora is celebrating the government's proposals, it will continue to support Ms Swarbrick's bill.
No matter what, there should be a playing field in which demonstrates that we have a commitment to removing or relinquishing those community groups from being so dependent on harmful funding streams and harmful funding avenues to do good things with. And that's sort of like, it's a double-edged sword where they're trying to promote community good, but it's being funded by community evil.
Whether the government is ready to make that commitment, we'll find out in March.
And that was Giles Dexter reporting there. Next up, no trick, but potentially a treat. Some Christchurch residents are going to great efforts to get into the Halloween spirit. A handful of properties in the suburb of Linwood have been decked out with extensive Halloween decorations in a bid for neighbourhood bragging rights. Our Christchurch reporter Adam Burns joins us now. Adam, how spooky is it there?
Yeah, kia ora, Lisa. To be honest, I feel a little bit underdressed, to be honest. We've just parked up at Thomas Street in Linwood, and it's really a kind of spooky, kind of creepy atmosphere. We've got spooky music kind of coming through the speakers of one property. We've got a makeshift graveyard on the front lawn. We've got skeletons kind of hanging from two pillars on the fence here. It's I don't think the radio listeners can really appreciate or fathom, I suppose, the lengths the property owners have gone to
watch
in
out,
terms
Adam,
of making
there's
this.
a ghoul approaching you over your shoulder there. Tell us a bit about the costumes and how people are dressed.
Yeah, I think several of the families here have gone to significant levels of effort, I guess, and yeah, as I said at the top, I do feel underdressed, but maybe next year. I'm just trying to get one of the property owners. He's busy scaring a bunch of children at the moment, but we'll see if we can get a few words with him. I'm sure the listeners can kind of hear the colour and the festivity in this Christchurch street at the moment. Jordan. I can't quite see you under that mask.
How's it going?
Hey, I mean, how long did it take? How long did it take you to go to? I mean, the lengths for this home.
4 weeks off and on for the front yard, and I took a week off work the last week to set up the backyard.
In terms of, I mean, how many? I mean, we see several children and families out the front. I mean, how many? What have the numbers been like?
I don't even know. I can't even comprehend the numbers at the moment. It's pretty insane.
Do they? I mean, this pretty much underlines. I think when we think of Halloween, especially in New Zealand, we think of it as a predominantly American celebration. Do you think more Kiwis are embracing Halloween as an event?
Slowly but surely, but I love it. It's like my favourite holiday. It's me to a T. So I love horrors. I love scaring people. So it's perfect.
Yeah, clearly. And in terms of the neighbours, I mean, we saw another property down the road. They'd already kind of were already out of supply of confectionery. Yeah. I mean, has there been a long-standing rivalry along the street?
Not a rivalry. We just we play with each other, which is good. But this is kind of bigger than what we expected this year. The media got hold of it and kind of blew it up a bit for us. So yeah.
Well, great effort. I really appreciate your time, Jordan.
Cheers, guys.
So as you can hear, Lisa, quite a spooky, electric atmosphere in Christchurch at the moment. Thanks.
Adam, can you just turn around and just describe some of the costumes for the people who are listening? First off, Jordan, how he's dressed, and then there was someone else in stripy pants and some scary masks going past.
Yeah, there's a lot of creepy clowns, like Harley Quinns. We've got, I don't know. I'm a little bit out of the loop when it comes to modern pop culture, but there's a lot of vampires, kind of fake blood. I don't know.
Be very careful.
The less time I spend here, the better, I say.
Be very careful, Adam. Yes, I think clowns are creepy at the best of times. Thank you for that. That's our Christchurch reporter, Adam Burns, there from the suburb of Linwood, where there's a couple of houses there that have gone to great efforts to set up their decorations, and you can check that out on video. There was a few ghouls just over his shoulder during that too. Now to Bluff, where locals have had the chance to meet a NASA astronaut. Dr. Shannon Walker is the veteran of 2 space missions and was in Southland to launch a new science showcase. Our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown went along to hang out with the star.
Dr. Shannon Walker has spent about a year of her life in space. But she says the pōwhiri she received this morning at Te Rau Aroha Marae is also out of this world.
The welcome here today was absolutely amazing. It was very humbling and inspiring. Gosh, it's hard to find the words it's so special when people invite you into their culture and ask you to be a part of it, and it's very humbling.
Dr. Walker formally launched Otago Museum's new science showcase, Tūhura Tuarangi, a travelling exhibition of all things Aotearoa and space. She says the country has a strong and growing reputation for space exploration among the international community.
In fact, that wasn't too long ago that I was watching one of the rocket lab launches from my house in Houston. So, yeah, it's a big partner, for sure.
And as someone who worked in one of the most common dream jobs among children, she's also an ambassador for what's possible with hard work.
We're not looking, you have to be this one thing to be an astronaut, because there's so much involved in spaceflight these days that pretty much if you are in the science and technology field, you're going to be qualified to be an astronaut.
Tūhura Otago Museum's Senior Science Engagement Coordinator, Dr. Andrew Mills, says bringing Dr. Walker to the Lower South is a huge coup for the museum and the science showcase.
She is an inspiration to the tamariki of Aotearoa, to be able to see her as someone that has actually been to space, someone that's looked down at New Zealand from above.
And some of the pupils of Bluff School, like Slade Lesk, were a little starstruck by their guest.
It felt real nervous, and I didn't want to speak to her because I would have been shy.
But for some of the older budding astronauts like Alistair Kennedy, rubbing shoulders with an astronaut is inspirational. The 17-year-old has been taken by space since his early years.
It's so boundless. There's no definitive, you can't do this, you can't do that. Space is just absolute, it's humongous. It's just anything can happen out there, and it really inspires you when you're a kid. It really makes you think critically and creatively as well.
Over the next few days, Dr. Walker will be speaking to students around Otago and Southland. She'll be spreading her message that they don't have to stay grounded because the universe is their oyster.
And you can check out the video for that story on our webpage. And sticking with the general theme of travel, some of you getting in touch about AT about to announce cuts to its bus schedule. Dave says great news about AT bus schedule. Route 75 Remuera Road service every 15 minutes has been diabolical, with 3 in a row always cancelled. Better to be a definite regular 30-minute service than pretending the old one works. Hallelujah, certainty at last, says Dave. And DB from Arch Hill says, as a regular bus user across Auckland, I would rather know what buses are coming and when rather than what's cancelled because of a lack of drivers. On the subject of Air New Zealand, Christine says, I feel the pain about high airfares. I also have family overseas. But when are we going to start the discussion about climate change? Price increase, however tough it is for people now, is much more preferable to the consequences we'll have to deal with if we do not start rethinking our emissions. Price increases are also one of the ways to start reducing air traffic and associated emissions. It will also start more research into alternatives. We must talk about changing our flying habits, says Christine. This one from another listener. You can fly to Australia, often cheaper than around New Zealand on routes that have no competition. Air New Zealand is extorting those passengers on internal flights, plus a lot more flights get cancelled. And someone else says 5 weeks ago they booked a return ticket to the UK with Air New Zealand, $2,593, $500 more than usual.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Ngā mihi o te pō. Good evening, I'm Evie Ashton. Air New Zealand says the best way to get the most affordable flights is to book early. The national airline is being accused of price gouging, with customers saying tickets are much more expensive than previously. There are no flights from Auckland to Wellington one way for less than $310 this week. The airline's chief executive, Greg Foran, has told Checkpoint the carriers are getting more planes, which will increase capacity and bring prices down.
Our domestic business currently is running at about 97% of what it was pre-COVID. So, my advice to customers is book earlier, please. We're getting as much capacity back as quickly as we can.
Greg Foran says rising fuel prices, inflation and high demand have pushed prices up. The Prime Minister says she'll continue to work with mayors on the Three Waters reforms, but doesn't want to see its fundamental principles undermined. Her comments come after the Mayor of Auckland, Christchurch and Waimakariri announced an alternative plan to the government's Three Waters scheme. Jacinda Ardern says the bottom line is ensuring costs don't increase for ratepayers.
We've said we're open to making refinements and changes that improve the reforms here that are just so necessary. But our bottom line is we don't want to change those matters which are focused on keeping cost of living in check. Without reform, ratepayers will see increases in their water bills.
Jacinda Ardern says she wants the Select Committee process to finish before commenting further. The number of people being treated in hospital for COVID-19 has risen to numbers last seen at the end of August. There are currently 323 people in hospital with the virus. 8 people are in intensive care, which is also a figure not seen in more than 2 months. The Ministry of Health has also reported more than 20,522 new cases in the past 7 days. Napier Police tried to get a vehicle to stop just minutes before it crashed, killing a young woman. They chose not to pursue it and it crashed soon after. Our Hawke's Bay reporter Tom Kitchen has more.
Just before midnight on Saturday, a dark blue Honda SUV was driving erratically in the CBD and failed to stop for police when signalled to do so. Police lost sight of it almost immediately after it turned around the corner. Officers chose not to pursue the vehicle, turned off their red and blue lights and pulled over. The fleeing SUV was found crashed a short time later on Shakespeare Road. 5 people are still in hospital after the crash. 9 people were in the car, most of them in their teens and 20s. 1 person died, 7 people were injured and 1 escaped unscathed.
The Aged Care Association says it's an absolute tragedy that an Auckland rest home is being forced to close. Critical staff shortages have meant that the not-for-profit Mercy Parklands Rest Home in Ellerslie has had to reduce beds at a cost of more than $100,000 a month. Aged Care Association Chief Executive Simon Wallace says it should be a wake-up call for the government that it's not funding the aged care sector adequately. An Auckland employer says the minimum wage exemption that still exists for disabled workers is insulting. Under the Minimum Wage Act, businesses can apply for an exemption to pay an employee less than the minimum wage on the basis they're less productive. Managing Director of Downlights, Jennifer Delbell, says businesses need to be paying all employees at least the minimum wage.
What does it say about how they value our disabled community? It's completely contradictory. The government is supposed to be supporting quality life for disabled people, and they're not doing that.
Figures from MB obtained by RNZ show some disabled workers are earning an average of just $5 an hour. A Rotorua real estate agent says she's regularly approached by residents living near emergency housing who want to sell up. Jodie Ratahi says it's heartbreaking to know locals are looking to move because of the proliferation of social housing in the suburb of Glenholme, which straddles the main street and motel strip. The Ministry of Housing and Urban Development and the Council have been meeting to discuss the future of 13 motels being used as social housing. More than 20 people have spoken at the hearing today. A group helping first-time home buyers say it's getting increasingly difficult for people to get onto the property ladder. Data from the Reserve Bank shows that the number of first-time buyers plummeted in September. The director of the First Home Buyers Club, Leslie Harris, says those who are securing properties are having to make more compromises.
People are probably seeing more of a get onto the property ladder as a starter home versus maybe once upon a time it was more, you get your first home and sort of plan to raise your family.
Leslie Harris says there's a big disconnect between what people are earning and what they can buy. And a NASA astronaut has launched Otago Museum's Space Science Showcase in Bluff, saying New Zealanders should reach for the stars. Tūhura Tuarangi Aotearoa in Space will be travelling through the country over the next 14 months. But the small Southland town and the children of Bluff School got the first peek today. Shannon Walker, a veteran of 2 space missions, says there are opportunities for New Zealanders to pursue a future in space.
We're not looking, you have to be this one thing to be an astronaut, because there's so much involved in spaceflight these days that pretty much if you are in the science and technology field, you're going to be qualified to be an astronaut.
Shannon Walker says New Zealand has a growing reputation for space exploration. That's the news.
Tonight we'll take an obsessive journey through the things we eat in a brand new series called The Fridge Light. Humans aren't the only beings that pick their noses. Science in Action tells us who else. Plus, we'll catch up with what's happening on Mars, wrap up all the Rugby World Cup action and pore over the field ahead of the Melbourne Cup. It all kicks off after 7 on Nights with me, Charlotte Ryan, and for Karen Hay on RNZ National.
And we're on air on rnz.co.nz and on your mobile. You're back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. For Northland, Auckland and the Coromandel Peninsula, cloudy periods, a few afternoon showers, thunderstorms possible in Northland today. Bay of Plenty and Gisborne, periods of rain with heavy falls in Eastern Bay of Plenty and the ranges of Gisborne. Fine tomorrow, apart from isolated afternoon showers. From Waikato to Manawatu, including the Central High Country, also Hawke's Bay and the Tararua district. Scattered showers, some heavy and possibly thundery, clearing this evening. Fine tomorrow, but areas of morning fog. For the remainder of Wairarapa and from Horowhenua to Wellington, isolated showers, clearing this afternoon or evening. Fine tomorrow. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury, also Otago and Southland, scattered showers. Some heavy with thunderstorms about Canterbury and North Otago, clearing this evening. Fine tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, showers, some heavy with thunderstorms possible in Westland and Bulla, turning to rain in Fiordland tomorrow evening. And for the Chatham Islands, Te Kohu, rain is your forecast. It's 7 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Thanks, Evie. I think we should start giving the studio temperature as part of the weather report.
Lots of climate change in here.
Yeah. No mai, hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Auckland Transport is slashing its bus timetable to avoid the uncertainty of hundreds of daily trip cancellations due to driver shortages. From Sunday, November 6th, bus trips that are regularly canned will be suspended indefinitely. AT says the move is to improve service reliability and customer confidence, and it will still be running around 12,000 bus trips a day. Well, joining us now is AT Group Manager of Metro Optimisation, Richard Harrison. Hi, Richard.
Hello, Lisa. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Can you tell me how many of these bus trips are being suspended indefinitely?
We're taking out 1,000 bus services from timetables next weekend. We're not reducing services and we're not keeping them out indefinitely. These are the ones that have been regularly cancelled for several weeks, and we simply want to give Aucklanders more certainty around what's happening at the moment.
So when you say about 1,000, sorry, your phone was just a bit crackly there, is that 1,000 a day you're talking about, trips?
Yeah, on a normal weekday, we have been cancelling around 1,500 trips, and now 1,000 of those we're going to take out of the timetable.
Well, they are suspended indefinitely if you don't have a date for them to come back. So what is the date to return to a full schedule?
I'd love to be able to give you a date, but I can't at the moment, Lisa. We'll put the trips back in as soon as a significant portion of the 500 drivers short are recruited. We've recently restored over 5,000 monthly trips in the east of Auckland that were removed in May, and that's as a result of GoBus doing a great job recruiting many new drivers. So as soon as the other operators are in a better position, then we'll put those trips back in other parts of the city.
OK, so the 1,000 that are suspended indefinitely, what routes are they along?
There's 85 routes that are going to have some reductions from next weekend, and that's out of about 186 in total. So there'll be a number of reductions spread across the city.
Can you guarantee that those routes that have been suspended, the trips, that they will actually come back?
That's the plan, absolutely. As soon as we get more drivers in and we're able to run them reliably, then we'll be putting them back in.
Sorry, I'm just going to get you to move a little bit, Richard, because your cell phone is a bit dodgy there with the signal, and I think this is important. You say the plan is to bring them back, but plan's not a guarantee, is it? So can you give the public now an undertaking that these trips will be reinstated?
Yes, I can guarantee that they'll be reinstated. The certainty is in getting the right number of drivers to be able to run them reliably, and then we'll put them back in.
OK, so along these routes, about 85 of them, what does it mean in terms of frequency? Please, what will be the difference?
Yes, great question. We are taking some of these trips out of higher frequency routes and routes where there are other forms of transport, so there are good alternatives for our customers. So what it should mean for a customer is that they'll see a slightly longer wait, but at least they'll know what service is coming.
So when you say slightly longer, what's going to be the average wait time on these routes that you're taking trips from?
Hard to say. It depends on the route. So on something like the NX1 service, where there are buses every couple of minutes at peak, it might be a few seconds or a couple of minutes longer wait.
Right, but you can't give us a maximum wait time as because of these adjustments to the timetable.
So we focused on making adjustments to the high-frequency routes. So routes that have got low frequency, we're focusing on keeping those running.
But adjusting high-frequency routes, so presumably they're high-frequency routes because they're high-demand routes, Richard.
They are, yeah. Remember, we've built a network that 2 years ago was handling 100 million boardings a year, and right now we're below 70% of that. So there is plenty of capacity across the network for people who want to travel.
Okay, so you're doing it to give people certainty, right?
That's right.
But overall, what do you think this is going to do to public transport use?
Well, we're still running around 12,000 trips a day. There are still good frequency out there, and with less traffic on the road, we're seeing really good punctuality across the network. So a lot of people have come back to public transport very quickly once COVID restrictions are lifted and offices and schools and tertiary institutions started opening again. So I'm confident that people are going to keep using public transport.
Yeah, but you're cutting 1,000 trips a day. So I'm asking you specifically about that. What do you think that is going to do to public transport use? Do you anticipate or have any forecasts of how many passengers you think you might lose as a consequence of this?
So remember, these trips are already not operating. We're not reducing service here. We're simply
Well, you are,
tables.
Richard, and I'm sorry, but you are, because these are trips that should be happening and they aren't. They're cancelled. So you are actually getting rid of some services for an indefinite period of time. So you are reducing services, aren't you?
They absolutely should be running, and we look forward to bringing them back in. Public transport patronage has grown over the last few months, even as we've had to reduce services to cope with the driver shortfall. So people are definitely rewarding us by getting on board.
Appreciate you joining us. That's Richard Harrison, who's from AT, discussing the cuts to the bus trip services. 1,000 a day roundabout are going to go so that they can be more certain about delivering the services because of a shortage of bus drivers. Luis Inácio Lula da Silva is next president of Brazil, but only by the narrowest of margins. The leftist former president, widely known as Lula, beat incumbent Jair Bolsonaro by less than 2 percentage points. One of Lula's first promises was to halt illegal logging in the Amazon rainforest. Deforestation has expanded significantly under Mr. Bolsonaro's presidency. Katie Watson reports from Sao Paulo.
It was always expected to be a close race, but it was a nail-biter till the very end. Lula supporters are coming out in force. They're chanting, "Lula has returned." And whether you like him or loathe him, the fact that Lula has come back to be president 20 years after he first became leader is a historic moment for people here in Brazil.
I have faith in God that with the help of the people, we will find a way out so that this country may live again democratically, harmoniously, and we can even re-establish peace between families.
Hoje, nós estamos dizendo ao mundo.
Today, we are telling the world that Brazil is back, that Brazil is too big to be relegated to the set role of pariah of the world.
Yes, this first speech was quite important. He committed to get zero deforestation, to curb illegal activities in the Amazon region, and also to protect the rights of indigenous peoples and traditional communities. These are quite huge challenges, especially because now we have a parliament that is much more conservative than it was when Lula was president before.
This is a very different Brazil. It's a very divided Brazil. Bolsonaro may no longer be president, but he'll have his legacy in Congress with conservative lawmakers making Lula's job very difficult and achieving everything he wants to do. So it is a difficult time. It will be a huge job for Lula. But certainly people here are pleased he's back, and that at least he can make a start in changing Brazil. People here talk about the fact that they want to leave behind anger and they want to leave behind hate. But it is a very divided country, and trying to unite this country will be Lula's biggest challenge.
An investigation's underway into the failure of a pedestrian suspension bridge in Gujarat, India. There were hundreds on the structure when it collapsed. As many as 80 people have died. The BBC's Ambaras Sunita Rajan reports.
A Sunday outing turned into a nightmare. The pedestrian suspension bridge in Morbi city collapsed, plunging hundreds into the river. Within seconds, a popular tourist attraction became the scene of a disaster. People were desperately clinging on to the cables and safety net to avoid falling into the river. A local official said most of those who died were women, children and the elderly.
Many children were enjoying holidays for Diwali, and they came here as tourists. All of them fell, one on top of another. The bridge collapsed due to overloading.
People from nearby areas and emergency teams rushed in to rescue stranded people. The 230-meter colonial-era bridge reopened to the public only last week after extensive renovations.
The accident took place at 6:40 p.m. and the bridge collapsed. Some people who were moving on the bridge got injured, while others fell into the water beneath. We started rescue work immediately and took the injured people to the hospital.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who is in his home state of Gujarat on a 3-day visit, said he was deeply saddened by the tragedy. The government has announced compensation for the injured, as well as the next of kin of those who have died. Questions will be asked to try to establish what went wrong and why so many people were allowed on the pedestrian bridge. The Gujarat government has ordered an investigation. For now, many families will be grieving and many others will keep looking for their missing relatives.
Distraught relatives in the South Korean capital Seoul have been visiting hospitals and a missing persons centre in search of people who may have been injured or killed in a weekend tragedy. 154 people died in a narrow alleyway in the Etowan district. Officials are warning the death toll could rise, the BBC's Jean McKenzie reports.
As the bodies are counted and the victims identified, devastating accounts of Seoul's Halloween night of horror are emerging. Thousands packed onto the streets to party. Until this narrow alleyway became so crowded, people were crushed to death.
This is where most people died. Most people died here.
Nuhail Ahmed was in the alley. He managed to climb onto a platform to safety, where he watched the horror play out.
So at first, someone pushed from the back, then we from here. It was quite a few times. Then I realized something's gonna happen. There's no way you can breathe. So everyone lifting up and that's what they're doing, taking their last breath and things. So they're kind of suffocating.
Others describe how people fell to the floor like dominoes.
I didn't sleep till now. I couldn't sleep because I see people dying in front of me. One guy, he knew that his friend is died. So he's still giving CPR for the next 30 minutes. And his friend is trying to stop him, but he's still resisting, he's still doing it.
This nearby community centre is saturated with grief. Families and friends come to register the missing. Some get the terrible news that their loved ones are among the dead.
Waves are coming in from both sides. And more people fell, and then I lost my friend. Yeah. And I had to turn around and I told the crowd, you can't come this way. People are dying.
For others, there's no information. This is almost as hard to hear. This woman's son went to work at a club in Itaewon last night.
I waiting for home. I didn't see him. He didn't come home. He's only son. It's only one I have.
Visiting the scene, the president too said he was struggling to process his grief. Something that should never have happened, he says. An acknowledgement that things went horribly wrong. This footage from last year shows police controlling the crowds at the same spot. This year, multiple witnesses say this didn't happen. The questions for authorities are how was this crowd allowed to get so out of control, and what could have been done to stop this terrible tragedy? But for now, this country is mourning the death of so many of its young.
It is 21 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Aucklanders may have experienced rain of biblical proportions yesterday, but we're not alone. Australia has recorded one of its wettest months in history, and it's causing headaches for farmers preparing to harvest. And as the ABC's Angus Randall reports, it may force a rethink of how the country's food bowl operates.
At Renmark in South Australia's Riverland, Tim Grieger is preparing to pick his first apricots of the season.
Well, I'm picking tomorrow or the next day, the first variety, so I'm looking for clear skies for that.
Last week, the town received close to half of its annual rainfall in just 4 hours, and October was the wettest month since records began in 1892. Renmark has avoided the flooding that's devastated communities across the border, but Tim Grieger says his harvest is still at risk of being wiped out.
With stone fruit, particularly apricots, you've only got a window of 1 or 2 days to get it off, and if rain stops picking, it could go soft, so you could lose the whole crop basically through not being able to get to harvest in time.
Agronomist Ryan McLaren is from Platinum Ag Services in Renmark. He's been helping locals deal with this record wet season and says fungicide is often the only option to deal with damp crops.
The fungicide actually puts a preventative over your crop to stop spores entering the leaf surface. So, you try to get it on before. The biggest issue in this area at the moment, is fungicide applications, with one, getting out to be able to get a cover on, and two, being able to get out in the ground. A lot of the guys in the heavier soil just can't get out to actually apply fungicide. So that's been a really big issue.
Ryan McLaren worries the impact of this year's rain could reverberate for seasons to come.
Everyone's just on edge, and obviously there's not a lot of money in some industries at the moment either, so some people are just going to have to pull the reins up and not be able to do anything. So that's the other issue. We're copping a really wet season, high fungicide pressure, and not a lot of return.
Heading east from Renmark, the latest monthly figures from the Bureau of Meteorology show it was the wettest October on record for New South Wales as a whole. Griffith in the state's Riverina recorded 5 times its average October rainfall. One possible way to prevent such widespread flood damage to Australia's food bowl is through protected farming. Professor Paul Gauthier is from the University of Queensland's Alliance for Agriculture and Food Innovation.
Well, protected cropping is a way of growing crop, I would say protected, but mainly indoor.
Protected cropping can range from the use of nets and greenhouses to growing entire crops indoors.
And you manage to increase the yield of the production of the crops up to 100 times what you could do in the field, and you're also very independent on the weather outside.
It might be hard to imagine massive areas of Australia's farmland turned into warehouses, but Professor Gauthier says by going indoors, you can also go up.
You could stack basically hectares on top of each other. So if you imagine like a warehouse, which would be an hectare, let's say an hectare of warehouse, and then if you put another level, then that's 2 hectares. If you put another level, that's 3 hectares. And then if you put another level, that's 4 hectares. But you have only used 1 hectare of land. That's really the difference. Instead of expanding horizontally, you expand vertically, and the sky is the limit.
He says lettuce and strawberries could be the test cases for large-scale vertical cropping in Australia. Back in South Australia's Riverland, agronomist Ryan McLaren says protected farming can be useful, but for the moment it has its limits.
In some industries it's practical, in small veg crops and things like that, possibly table grapes. But generally in our wine industry and big orchards like almonds, it's a little hard to do.
And the rain isn't likely to let up soon. Meteorologists say the La Niña weather system will bring more falls right up until the new year.
The ABC's Angus Randall reporting there. Menopause. For some women, the symptoms can be debilitating, yet it's a subject that for many years has hardly ever been talked about. The BBC's Kate Bradbrook has been to a menopause cafe where women can find friendship and support.
Hot sweats throughout the day, very unprompted, and in situations where you get highly embarrassed. And you're highly embarrassed because you think you're sweaty Betty.
I was suffering from fear and anxiety, and I slowly became a bit of a recluse and hid away in my office. I worked from home, so I made excuses not to go to the supermarket.
It's like dizziness, hot flushes, forgetting that I need tea bags when I walk in the next room, joint pain, very, very irritable.
I just used to think that was just me just going through some weird
phase and then realise, actually, maybe it could be menopausal or perimenopausal.
Oh, you're all so well behaved. And we've got a school teacher, so I'm sure she's used to hearing bells ringing as well.
It's something which affects half the population. And today, those who have been through it, are going through it, or are just curious about it, came together to talk everything.
I was diagnosed with early menopause at 32 after I had my son, and I've been living with the symptoms ever since, really, and just come today to talk to other people, see what their experiences are.
Is this just me? Is it just me who does this, or is it oh, somebody else has this happen to them? Oh my gosh, it's not just me. And that gives you the opportunity to take such a weight off your mind that it's not just you.
Menopause cafes are popping up all over the world. These not-for-profit events are open to everyone, regardless of gender or age. Today was the first time Royston had hosted one.
We haven't talked about it enough because there are still women who don't really understand. There are women who are younger, coming towards menopause, they're not sure what to expect. It's not even something they talk to their mothers or their sisters about. So I think there is still room for us to be talking about it and getting more knowledgeable about it as well, so it's less scary.
And those here today have a lot in common.
The anxiety isn't just me, it seems to be everybody that we've talked to so far has got the anxiety, and I keep saying that it's one of the biggest symptoms.
Just really nice to talk to lots of other ladies about what they've been through.
The hope is that by talking about it, no one is left to cope alone.
And let's get to some of your feedback now on public transport, and this is AT trimming the schedule of buses, losing 1,000 trips a day because of the shortage of drivers. This listener says, come on, you transport officials, what's the point of being certain a bus will come when you aren't at all certain you can get on it? Still many commuters are left stranded every morning. Even more will face this. And on the subject of workers with disabilities not getting the minimum wage, these are exemptions that some businesses can apply for, and we know of one case where a person's being paid $1.55 an hour. This listener says all workers, including people with disabilities, should receive minimum wage, period. Oh, the Labour Party should be ashamed, and I'm a socialist. The Labour Party should do the right thing now. Cara says no worker should be paid the minimum wage. Maybe those who promote it should try and make ends meet on such a wage. Another listener says it's disgusting that people with disabilities are not paid the minimum wage. They have the same living costs. They are being discriminated against just because they are labelled disabled. Lots of different people work at different rates to others. Some are more productive than others. And this one says the Labour Party dragging their feet. That's not good enough. They will wear out their souls. On the subject of Air New Zealand, someone says... bought a ticket in May, round trip to San Fran, $3,600. Went to America again in July, August. Economy ticket, $4,700. These were family emergencies, can't afford to go again. This from Peter, a shout out to Air New Zealand. Says he had the good fortune to fly on the New York flight last week, did it the right way. Crew was great, on the button. Pilots worked really hard to make it a non-stop flight, having to deviate around the Mexican volcano. I give the flight in Air New Zealand 10 out of 10, says Peter. Now, tomorrow, don't forget to tune in at 5 a.m. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō. On First Up, they're speaking to a Waikato shop owner who's been raided 3 times, ram-raided, and says if something's not done, it could spell the end of a family business like his. Have a wonderful evening. Kia pai tōpō. We'll catch you tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou. Good evening. I'm Evie Ashton. The Prime Minister says her priority is ensuring ratepayers don't pay more for water as 3 mayors promote an alternative to the Three Waters reforms. Air New Zealand says fares will reduce as the airline brings on more planes. National has a short list of 3 candidates for the Hamilton West by-election in December. And a NASA astronaut promoting Otago Museum's Space Science exhibition believes there are opportunities for New Zealanders to pursue a future in space. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7 o'clock.
Pacific Waves, delving deeper into the major Pacific stories of the week in Aotearoa, New Zealand, the region and the world. I bring you interviews with Pacific newsmakers, experts and commentators in their fields as well as up-to-date coverage from our talented team here at RNZ Pacific and our correspondents on the ground in the region. Pacific Waves, 8:15 weeknights on RNZ National.
And now it's time for the detail. Bank profits are set to crack $10 billion. Is it too much, or are the banks just an easy target for criticism?